One night at San Francisco International Airport, 4 airplanes full of passengers were waiting to take off. Then, they saw another plane coming in fast to land. The plane got permission from air traffic control to land. At first, the pilots of the waiting planes thought there was a mix-up and that the incoming plane would fix its path. But they were wrong. The plane coming in to land was heading straight for them. This scary event happened not too long ago, on July 7, 2017. Air Canada's Flight 759 took off from Toronto Pearson International Airport with 135 passengers and 5 crew members. It was supposed to be a normal flight to San Francisco. But what happened next would be remembered for a long time. The flight from Toronto to San Francisco was supposed to be just like any other. It usually takes about 5 hours and 30 minutes. The pilots flying the plane were very good at their jobs. They had flown to San Francisco many times before without any problems. But this day was different. What happened on this flight would become a big lesson for everyone who flies planes. The flight was going well at first. The plane was up in the sky, moving smoothly towards San Francisco. As they got closer to the airport, the pilots got ready to land. They contacted the people in the air traffic control tower, the ones who help planes land safely.
And tower, just want to confirm this Air Canada 759, we see some lights on the runway there, across the runway. Can you confirm we're clear to land?
Air Canada 759, confirm clear to land, runway 28 right, there is no one on 28 right, flight view.
They were waiting for the okay to land. Now, let's talk about the runways at San Francisco Airport. There are 4 runways in total, but only 2 can be used at the same time. Which 2 depends on the wind. Planes need to take off and land facing the wind. On the day of our story, the wind was blowing from the west. This meant that the pilots had to use one of the runways that face west for landing. These runways are called 28L and 28R, which stand for 28 left and 28 right. Understanding this is crucial because it sets the stage for what happened next. The pilots of Flight 759 were preparing to land on one of these runways, following the rules of flying against the wind. But as we'll see, even the best laid plans can go awry. Everything seemed normal as the plane got ready to land, but then things started to go wrong. One of the runways, 28L, was closed because it needed fixing, so its lights were off. The people in the control tower told Air Canada 759 to land on the runway next to it, 28R. The pilots had landed here many times before, so they thought they knew what to expect. They were looking for 2 sets of lights, side by side, and planned to land on the right-hand side. But this is where they made their first big mistake. You see, there are 2 paths called taxiways next to these runways. They're usually green and are where planes go after they land or before they take off. But that night, it was so dark that the pilots got confused. They saw the lights of the taxiway and thought it was their runway, 28R. But in reality, they were heading towards the taxiway, not the runway they were supposed to land on. But the pilots didn't know the biggest danger yet. On the taxiway they were heading towards, 4 other planes were waiting. 3 of these were from United Airlines, and 1 was from Philippine Airlines. Together, they had over 1,000 passengers on board, and their fuel tanks were full. The scary part, there was only a 100-meter gap between the runway where they were supposed to land and the taxiway they were actually approaching. From far away in the control tower, it was hard for the controllers to see exactly where Air Canada 759 was going to touch down. The night was dark, and the lights on the taxiway might have looked like the lights on the runway. This mix-up was about to turn into a very dangerous situation. Now a big question comes up. Why didn't anyone tell the pilots of Air Canada 759 that one of the runways was closed? If they had known this, they wouldn't have been confused. The news about runway 28L being closed was in a special message called NOTAMs, which stands for Notices to Airmen. These messages have all sorts of information about the flight, from start to finish. But here's the catch. NOTAMs can be really long and full of details. It's not always easy to spot the most important bits of information in them. And that's what happened here. The pilots missed the part about runway 28L being closed. This oversight was their second big mistake, adding to the mix-up that was unfolding. Air Canada 759 was getting closer and closer, but not to the runway. They were heading for the taxiway by mistake. The control tower had told them to do a visual approach. This means the pilots had to use their eyes to line up the plane with the runway. Usually this is okay when the weather is good, but there's a tricky part. Sometimes during a visual approach, pilots make mistakes and land in the wrong place. To avoid this, pilots often use a special tool called an instrument guidance system. This tool helps them know if they're lined up with the right runway. For this tool to work, the pilots have to put in the number of the runway they're landing on. Nowadays, many planes do this automatically, but the plane in our story, an Airbus A320, needed the pilots to do it by hand. For some reason, the pilots didn't do this. And that was their third big mistake. You might be wondering, why were the pilots making so many mistakes? Well, they were really tired. It was almost midnight, and they had been working for 19 hours without much rest. Being tired can make it hard to think clearly and make good decisions. These pilots were from Canada. Back then, the rules in Canada about how long pilots could work without getting too tired weren't as strict as in some other places, like the United States. So even though they were very tired, they were still allowed to fly the plane. We've talked about the mistakes made by the pilots of Air Canada 759, but what about the pilots in the 4 planes waiting on the taxiway? They saw that the Air Canada plane wasn't heading for the runway, but didn't tell the control tower. Why not? Well, at San Francisco Airport, when a plane is coming in to land, it usually comes in a bit from the right side. This is to avoid flying directly over a nearby area called Foster City, which could be noisy for the people living there. So, the pilots of the waiting planes thought this was just a normal approach at first. But as the Air Canada plane got closer and didn't move to line up with the runway, something seemed off. The pilots of a Philippine Airlines plane even turned on their lights to warn the Air Canada plane. But by then, it was almost too late. Meanwhile, the pilots of Air Canada 759 started to notice something odd. They saw some lights where they thought runway 28R should be. Something didn't feel right. They quickly radioed the control tower to check.
And tower, just want to confirm this Air Canada 759, we see some lights on the runway there.
The tower told them that runway 28R was empty and they could land.
Air Canada 759, confirm clear to land runway 28 right. There is no one on 28 right but you.
But actually, both the tower and the pilots were mistaken. The plane was heading for the taxiway, not the runway. Usually there's a special controller to watch the ground traffic, but it was late at night and things were quiet, so there was only one controller handling everything. This made it harder to spot the mistake. The pilots waiting to take off heard the radio chat between Air Canada and the control tower. They were puzzled. Why wasn't the Air Canada plane lining up with the runway? Time was running out. They realized the plane was coming straight for them. Acting fast, the pilot of the United Airlines plane sent an urgent message to the tower, not even using his call sign. The tower told Air Canada to go around, meaning to stop landing and fly up again. Just in time, Air Canada pulled up, missing the third plane in line by only a few feet.
759, confirm clear to land runway 28 right. There is no one on 28 right but you.
Where's this guy going? He's on the taxiway.
Air Canada, go around.
In the go around, Air Canada 759.
759, looks like we're lined up. Fly heading 280, climb maintain 3000.
It was a close call. If there had been even a 1-second delay, it could have been the worst crash in aviation history. With 1,000 passengers in the waiting planes and 135 in Air Canada, all with full fuel tanks, it's hard to imagine what might have happened. After this scary moment, experts looked into what happened very carefully. They found that the pilots of Air Canada 759 made some big mistakes. They didn't use a special tool that could have helped them land safely, and they missed an important warning about the runway being closed. Because of this, the people in charge of making sure flying is safe decided to change some rules. At San Francisco Airport, pilots can't do a visual approach, where they land just by looking, if one of the runways is closed. Also, there has to be a special controller watching the ground traffic, especially when it's not very busy. These changes were made to help prevent this kind of mix-up from happening again. It's a reminder of how important it is to follow all the rules and use all the tools available to keep flying safe for everyone.